All right, good. Yes, you can hear me. Okay, so I got done watching the movie Seven last night. Um, I'm not gonna give away anything for the movie, obviously, but I watched the movie and I was like, damn, dude, it'd be cool to have like a detective hunting down a serial killer during like the zombie apocalypse. I know that's like my thing is always like, oh, it's during the zombie apocalypse, but dude, I could talk about zombies for the rest of my life. So, um, this tonight's story is called The Last Hunt. So, chapter one, first signs. The rain hammered against my windshield like bullets from heaven, each drop carrying the weight of a dying world. I should have known then that this case would be different. Should have recognized the omens scattered across the cities like breadcrumbs leading to hell. My name is Detective Marcus Riley, and I've been hunting killers for 23 years. In that time, I've seen every flavor of human depravity the mind can conjure. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I'd encounter in those final weeks before civilization crumbled. The call came in at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday that felt like the end of everything. Bodies discovered in an abandoned warehouse on the south side, arranged in what dispatch called an unusual manner. That was a cop speak for something so fucked up that even hardened officers couldn't find the words. I pulled up on the scene as the first pale fingers of dawn reached through the storm clouds. The building scattered, the building squatted before me like a malignant tumor, its broken windows reflecting nothing but darkness. Police cars lined the streets, their red and blue lights painting the world in colors of emergency and death. Detective Sarah Valdez met me at the door, her usually composed face pale as parchment. We'd been partners for 6 years, and I'd never seen her rattled. During the Riverside Strangler case, not even when we found those kids in the basement on Elm Street. Hang on. There we go. You need to see this, Marcus, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I have to warn you, it's not like anything we've dealt with before. I followed her through the maze of evidence markers and crime scene tape. The warehouse smelled of rust and decay, with an underlying sweetness that made my stomach turn. It was the smell of death, but wrong somehow, corrupted. The bodies were arranged in a perfect circle in the center of the main floor, 7 of them, each positioned with mathematical precision. But it wasn't their arrangement that stopped me cold. It was their condition. Every corpse showed signs of massive trauma to the head and upper torso, as if they'd been torn apart by wild animals. Yet the wounds were surgical in their precision, calculated in their savagery. Jesus Christ, I breathed, pulling out my notebook with hands that weren't quite steady. There's more, Sarah said, leading me to the far wall. Carved in the concrete with what looked like a blade were 7 words in script so precise it would have been printed. The hunger spreads through flesh and spirit. Below the inscription, nailed to the wall with railroad spikes, was a photograph. It showed a crowded street scene, pedestrians going about their daily business, unaware they were being watched. But someone had drawn circles around 7 faces in the crowd, making them like targets. The photo was taken 3 blocks from here, Sarah said, yesterday morning. I studied the faces in the photograph, committing each one to memory. A businessman in an expensive suit, a young mother pushing a stroller, an elderly man feeding pigeons. Ordinary people living ordinary lives, now marked for death by a mind that had slipped beyond the boundaries of sanity. Any witnesses? I asked, though I already knew the answer. None that are talking. But Marcus. Sarah hesitated, then pointed to the corner where the coroner's team was loading the last body. I ran the prints on all 7 victims. They match missing persons reports from the past 2 weeks. But here's the thing. They were all reported missing from different cities. Portland, Sacramento, Phoenix. How does someone grab 7 people from across the western United States and bring them here? That question would haunt me for the next 72 hours. Because while I was trying to understand how our killer had managed such an impossible feat, the world around us began to change. Chapter 2. The pattern emerges. The second crime scene appeared 36 hours later, in the basement of a derelict hospital on the east side. This time, there were 9 bodies arranged in concentric circles, each one mutilated with the same surgical precision. The message carved into the foundation wall was different, but equally cryptic. Death is only the first transformation. I stood in that basement, breathing through my mouth to avoid the stench, and felt something cold settle in my gut. This wasn't random violence. This was ritual. Purpose. Someone was building toward something, and we were running out of time to stop them. Marcus, you need to hear this. Sarah called from across the room. She was crouched beside a pile of debris, holding what looked like a digital recorder. I found it hidden behind those loose bricks. The voice that emerged from the device was calm, educated, with the slight accent of someone who'd spent years in academia. It spoke with the measured cadence of a professor delivering a lecture. Day 14 of the great work. The subjects responded as predicted to the introduction of the modified pathogen. Initial resistance lasted approximately 6 hours before complete neural subjection occurred. The transformation is beautiful to observe. The moment when individual consciousness surrenders to collective hunger. Sarah and I exchanged glances. Modified pathogen. This was starting to sound less like a serial killer and more like bioterrorism. The recording continued. Dr. Elizabeth Thorne was correct in her theoretical framework, though she lacked the vision to see its practical applications. The barrier between life and death is far more permeable than conventional science acknowledges. Soon, very soon, the barriers will collapse entirely. The voice paused, and in that silence, I heard something that made my blood freeze. A low, guttural moan that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The city will be the petri dish. The state will be the laboratory. And the world will be reborn in hunger. The recording ended with a sound like static mixed with screaming. I was labeling the device as evidence when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Captain Rodriguez, and his voice was tight with controlled panic. Riley, I need you and Valdez at City General Hospital now. We've got reports of some kind of outbreak in the emergency ward. Multiple casualties. And the descriptions. He paused. They don't make any sense. You need to go check it out. We made it to the hospital in 12 minutes, running code 3 through streets that seemed eerily empty for mid-afternoon. The first thing I noticed was the smell. That same sweet decay I'd encountered at the crime scenes, but amplified tenfold. The second thing I noticed was the silence. No sirens, no radio chatter, no sounds of organized emergency response. Just an ambulance parked sideways across the entrance, its doors hanging open, revealing an interior painted with blood. Sarah drew her weapon as she approached the main entrance. Through the glass doors, I could see into the emergency waiting room, and what I saw there would give me nightmares for the rest of my abbreviated life. Bodies. Everywhere. But they weren't lying still like corpses should. They were moving. Jerky, unnatural movements like marionettes operated by a drunk puppeteer. Some were crawling along the floor, leaving trails of dark fluid. Others stood swaying against walls, their heads lolling at impossible angles. What the fuck is happening in there? Sarah whispered. Before I could answer, one of the figures pressed itself against the glass door. Once, it might have been a nurse. The scrubs were the right color, though now they were torn and stained with fluids I didn't want to identify. But the face. Christ, the face was wrong. Gray skin stretched too tight over prominent bones, eyes that reflected light like a nocturnal animal's, and teeth that looked like they'd been filed to points. The thing that used to be a nurse opened its mouth and let out a sound that was part scream, part hunger. Other figures in the emergency room turned toward us, drawn by the noise. We need to get out of here, I said, but Sarah was already backing toward the car. And that's when I saw him, a figure standing perfectly still among the chaos inside the hospital. While everything else moved with that horrible, jerky motion, he stood motionless as a statue, tall, thin, wearing a doctor's coat that was pristinely clean despite the carnage around him. He turned toward the glass door, and for one terrible moment, our eyes met. His face was ordinary, the kind of face you'd forget 5 minutes after meeting. But his eyes held the cold intelligence of someone who understood exactly what was happening and why. He raised one hand in what it might have been a greeting or a blessing and smiled. It was the most terrifying expression I'd ever seen, because it was filled with genuine warmth and satisfaction. The smile of someone whose life work was finally bearing fruit. Then the lights in the hospital went out, and the screaming began in earnest. Man. Chapter 3. The Hunter Becomes Hunted. We spent the next 3 hours at the precinct, trying to make sense of the reports flooding in from across the city. Similar incidents at 3 more hospitals, a nursing home on the north side, and what appeared to be coordinated attacks on emergency services. The common thread was always the same: people attacking other people with inhuman savagery, then the victims rising to continue the cycle. By midnight, we'd lost contact with half our patrol units. The one still reporting in painted a picture of a city consuming itself from the inside out. "It's not random," I told Captain Rodriguez as we studied the incident map. "Look at the pattern. He's targeting specific locations, medical facilities, senior centers, anywhere people are vulnerable or where bodies would naturally accumulate." "You think this is still our serial killer?" Rodriguez asked. "This looks more like some kind of epidemic." "It's both," Sarah said, pointing to the timeline we constructed. "Every major outbreak site has reports of unusual deaths in the days leading up to the chaos. Bodies arranged in ritual patterns, always with those carved messages." I thought about the recording we found, about the voice mentioning a modified pathogen. He's not just killing people. He's been preparing them, like test subjects. And that's when the lights went out. Emergency power kicked on, and a few seconds later, bathing the precinct in hellish red light. Through the windows, I could see that the entire city block was dark, but in the darkness, things were moving. "Hey, Monica." "Everyone away from the windows," Rodriguez ordered, but his voice cracked on the last word. The first impact against the front door came like a thunderclap, then another, then a sustained battering that made the whole building shake. Through the reinforced glass, we could see them. Dozens of figures pressing against the entrance, their faces twisted in an expression of mindless hunger. "The roof," I said. "We can get to the adjacent building from there." But as we climbed the stairs, I could hear glass breaking below us. They were getting inside. The night air on the roof felt clean after the stale terror of the building below. Sarah and I helped Rodriguez across the narrow gap to the neighboring office building while behind us. The sounds of destruction grew louder. "There!" Sarah pointed to a fire escape on the far side of the building. "We can get to the street and try to reach the highway." It was a good plan. It might even have been worked if we hadn't been waiting for, or it might even have worked if they weren't waiting for us. The figure from the hospital stood in the shadows beside the fire escape, no longer wearing his doctor's coat. Instead, he was dressed in a simple black suit that seemed to absorb what little light filtered down from the cloudy sky. "Detective Riley," he said, and his voice was exactly the same as the one on the recording. Calm, educated, utterly reasonable. I was hoping we'd have a chance to meet properly. I had my gun out, pointed at his chest. "Dr. Gabriel Ashford, I presume?" He smiled that terrible, warm smile. "Very good. I was beginning to worry that you weren't worthy of serving as the final component in my work." "Final component?" "Every great transformation requires a catalyst. You've been hunting me, detective, but you never understood that you were always meant to be part of the equation, the last piece of the pattern." Sarah was moving to flank him, her own weapon drawn, but something in his casual confidence made me hesitate. In my experience, the really dangerous ones never worried about guns unless they had a very good reason. "The pathogen you've been spreading," I said, trying to keep him talking. "What is it?" "It's not a pathogen," Ashford replied. "Not in any conventional sense. It's a key, a way of unlocking what we've always carried within us but never dared to access. The hunger that drives us to consume, to survive, to continue existing no matter the cost to others. I've simply amplified it. By turning people into cannibalistic monsters? His laugh was genuinely delighted. Monsters? Oh, detective, you still don't understand. I haven't created monsters. I've created honesty. Every person you've seen tonight, every transformed soul shambled through our dying streets, they're finally expressing their truest nature, the predatory instinct that civilization taught us to suppress. Below us, I could hear the sounds of the infected breaking through into the building. We were running out of time. What do you want from me? I asked. I want you to choose, Ashford said. You can die here, tonight, as just another victim of the chaos. Or you can join me in witnessing the birth of a new world. All it requires is accepting one simple truth, which is that you've always been a hunter, detective. All your years of tracking killers, studying their methods, understanding their motivations, you've been preparing yourself for this moment, the moment when you stop pretending to be civilized and embrace what you really are. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small vial filled with dark liquid. One drop on the tongue, and you'll never have to pretend again. You'll join the ranks of the eternally hungry, and your prey will be infinite. The building shook as something heavy crashed through the door below us. Multiple somethings. They'd found our trail and were coming up. Choose quickly, detective. Die as a failure, or live forever as perfection incarnate. Chapter 4. The Final Hunt. I looked at the vial in his hand, then at Sarah, who was watching me with eyes full of trust and terror. Below us, the sound of destruction grew closer. Above us, the sky was beginning to lighten with the false dawn of a burning sky. You know what? I said, steadying my aim. I've got a better idea. I pulled the trigger. The bullet took him center mass, spinning him around, but instead of dropping, he straightened up with that same serene smile. When he turned back to face me, I could see the hole in his shirt, but no blood. I was transformed weeks ago, detective. Physical damage is irrelevant now. He held up the vial again. Last chance. And that's when Sarah opened fire from his blind side, putting 3 rounds into his head. This time, he went down, the vial flying from his hand to shatter against the roof's ledge. But as the dark liquid spread across the concrete, it began to smoke and hiss. Where it touched, the building material started to dissolve. We need to move, I said, but the words were barely out of my mouth when the roof began to collapse. Sarah and I jumped from the neighboring building as the office complex folded in on itself like a house of cards. We hit the adjacent roof hard, rolling to absorb the impact. And when I looked back, the entire building was gone, replaced by a smoking crater that seemed to extend down to the earth itself. The vial, Sarah gasped. What the hell was in that vial? I didn't have an answer, but I had a terrible suspicion that we'd just prevented something even worse than the chaos already consuming the city. The next several hours blurred together in a haze of escape and survival. The infection, or transformation, or whatever Ashford had called it, was spreading faster than we could track. Emergency services had completely collapsed. The military presence that had been promised never materialized. By the time we reached the highway, we could see the glow of fires consuming the downtown area. Behind us, the city was dying. Ahead of us lay an uncertain future in a world where the rules of civilization no longer applied. We found an abandoned patrol car with half a tank of gas and a working radio. The emergency broadcasts painted a picture of similar outbreaks in major cities across the country. Some talked about government safe zones. Others warned that the safe zones had already fallen. Where do we go? Sarah asked as we drove through the empty suburbs, past houses where families had barricaded themselves behind furniture and hope. I thought about Ashford's words, about the choice he'd offered me, to become a hunter in his new world order, or to remain human in a world that no longer had room for humanity. North, I said. away from the population centers. Find somewhere rural, defensible. Try to help whoever we can along the way. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all we had. As we drove through the pre-dawn darkness, I couldn't shake the image of Ashford's smile. Even in death, he'd achieved his goal. The world was transforming, and there was no going back. But there was something else, something that gave me a strange kind of hope. For all his talk about embracing our predatory nature, about revealing the monster in every human heart, he'd been wrong about one fundamental thing. He'd assumed that when faced with the choice between survival and mortality, between embracing the darkness or holding on to the light, most people would choose to become monsters. But as we passed through the chaos of that dying night, I saw something different. I saw people helping strangers escape burning buildings. I saw parents sacrificing themselves to save children who weren't their own. I saw ordinary citizens forming barricades not to keep others out, but to protect everyone inside. Ashford had unleashed humanity's capacity for savagery, but he'd also underestimated its capacity for heroism. The radio crackled with a new transmission. A group of survivors in the mountains, talking about establishing a settlement, about building something new from the ashes of the old world. They were asking for anyone with medical training, law enforcement experience, or organizational skills to join them. Sarah looked at me and smiled. It was the first genuine smile I'd seen since this nightmare began. "Still, want to be a detective in the New World?" she asked. I thought about it as we turned onto the mountain road, leaving the burning city behind us. Somewhere out there, in whatever society managed to rebuild itself, there would still be a need for people who understood justice, who could hunt the predators that would inevitably emerge from the chaos. The monsters might be different in the New World, but there would always be monsters, and there would always be those willing to hunt them. "Yeah," I said, watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of gold and hope. "I think I do." The case of Dr. Gabriel Ashford was officially closed, but my career as a detective was just beginning. In a world overrun by literal monsters, someone had to keep track of the metaphorical ones. The hunt continues. Epilogue. New beginnings. 6 months later, I was standing in what used to be called Colorado, in a settlement we'd named Haven. Population 400 and growing. We'd established a council government, trade networks with other surviving communities, and yes, a law enforcement division. The infected still roamed the dead cities, but they were predictable now. Dangerous but manageable. Like any other natural hazard. It was the human predators who required real hunting skills. The raiders who preyed on weak settlements. The would-be warlords who tried to establish kingdoms built on slavery and fear. Sarah had become our head of community security. Jesus. I'd taken the title of chief investigator, though my business cards, hand-printed on salvaged paper, just said detective. The work was different but familiar. People were still people, with all their capacity for both good and evil. The apocalypse hadn't changed human nature. It had just stripped away the veneer of civilization that usually kept the extremes in check. But Ashford had been wrong about one crucial thing. When the veneer was stripped away, what emerged wasn't just monsters. It was also heroes. Teachers who organized schools in bombed-out buildings. Doctors who treated patients by candlelight. Engineers who figured out how to restore power to entire communities using salvaged parts. And yes, detectives who made sure that in a world where the old laws no longer applied, new forms of justice could still be found. I never found out exactly what was in that vial Ashford had tried to give me, but I suspect it would have done more than just transform me into one of the infected. I think it would have made me into something worse. A thinking monster, like him. Intelligent enough to justify any atrocity. Powerful enough to implement any horror. The world had plenty of mindless monsters already. It didn't need any more thinking kind. My last case in the old world had been hunting a serial killer during the zombie apocalypse. My first case in the new world had been tracking down a group of raiders who'd been kidnapping children from different settlements, or smaller settlements. Different monsters. Same job. I was good at it then, and I'm good at it now. Some skills transcend the end of the world. After all, somebody has to hunt the hunters. The case files on my desk were getting thicker every week, but each one solved meant more people could sleep safely at night. In a world full of darkness, that was enough to keep the light going. Detective Marcus Riley, still on the job, still hunting. The end. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that story. I got to go now and give my kids baths and stuff, but I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Like I said, I don't do these live things that often, but it's a lot easier to do these than sit there and edit them all up. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Come back next time for some more scary stories. And as always, remember to face your fears.